Hi, my name is Emily McCord, and I'm VP of Core Products and Platform at Upwork. And I'm going to be speaking today about how to stay motivated and connected during this time of disruption and change. I'll start, though, with a little bit about my background. I spent most of my career working in product, first at Starwood Hotels, now Marriott, where I started and led the product team. I was responsible for all customer-facing sites at Starwood, and I grew that business to be about $4 billion before I left. Starwood and Marriott were a great place to grow a product career for a couple of reasons. First, they didn't have tech company resources, so our team was small and scrappy, which meant I got to do a lot of different things, even early in my career. And second, hotel companies are inherently very complex and have a lot of different types of systems, more than just the obvious ones like e-commerce and loyalty. Because we were a scrappy team, everyone was working on things like using mobile in hotels, how to use digital to make conferences and events smarter, how to use digital in hotel rooms, and how to keep the housekeeping staff work more efficiently. And finally, global companies are great to work for. I've always loved working with colleagues all over the world, and I love the challenges of building products for a global audience. After Marriott, I moved from New York City to the Bay Area and ran a product at a health tech startup. And I'd recommend time at a startup for anyone. For me, it was really fulfilling to take a product from 0 to 1 and to see it actually find product market fit. Last October, I took a role leading product at Upwork. And Upwork is a two-sided marketplace that matches people looking for work with businesses looking for employees. Our community of employees earned over $3 billion on Upwork in 2021 across categories like engineering, creative and design, finance and accounting, consulting, and customer service. And we serve businesses from one-person startups to 50% of the Fortune 500. I picked the role partly because it had the kind of breadth of responsibility I enjoyed in previous roles, but also because I loved Upwork and what it stood for. Because the way I thought about work had changed after the pandemic. And what I learned when I started here was that I'm not alone. We do a lot of research about work and labor patterns at Upwork, and we know from that people now aren't just leaving one employer for another. We're seeing that instead they're leaving their jobs after reevaluating their priorities, which in many cases has led to freelancing and other flexible remote work models that Upwork supports. People are really looking to better align their life and work with what they value most. And we see that in employees who join our platform. Most of them are joining our platform to freelance, and they've never done it before. Freelancers are about evenly split between those who are joining the platform to work full-time and those who are doing it to make money on the side. But we also know that freelancers are actually pretty experienced. These aren't people who are just dabbling. The moment we're living in and where we've been living these past 2 years are defining the next era of work for companies and for employees. And the reality is we're just at the beginning of seeing the impacts of the pandemic on work and workers. So we know there are a lot of different disruptive factors at play in the working world today. But given that, how do each of us keep our careers on track while making sure we don't burn out in the process? I'll share today a few ideas that have worked for me. First, make sure your work is meaningful. Work can be meaningful in many ways. Maybe most obviously, it can be work that's strategically important to the company, with a clear line of sight from your roadmap to the company's objectives and key results. This is the kind of work where there is the clearest payoff. For example, where people get promoted. but it can also be the trickiest to navigate. If this is the role you're in, and I cannot emphasize this enough, make sure you're aligned with your manager on what it's going to take to move to the next level. Because you could be doing great work, your best work, but if you're not doing something that's aligned with company priorities, you're not going to move forward. Here, I'll stop and give you an example from my own life. Earlier in my career, I worked for a company that was very strongly focused on brand and branded experiences. And if you've ever worked for one of these companies, you know what I'm talking about. Because in these companies, brand is the business and it's what drives everything. But working in the digital group, even early in my career, I thought, I feel like we could be making some real strides in e-commerce, optimizing our funnel, doing things like that. I did some research, found some really great areas of opportunity, and pitched a project to optimize one part of the funnel. Got funding, worked really hard on it for months, built a prototype, and got really positive feedback from user testing on that prototype, really positive feedback. But what I neglected to realize at the time was optimizing an e-commerce funnel was what I was passionate about, not what was strategically important to the company. So the project never saw the light of day, and I never got any credit for it. I'd still argue that it would have been really impactful, but that's really not what matters. So sit down with your manager, discuss specifically what you want to have done at mid-year, at year end. Does this align with what your manager is thinking, with what company priorities? If not, how should you change it? Really probe for whether your work is going to make a difference. And if it's not, ask specifically what you should change. Work can also be personally meaningful, either because you're at a mission-driven company or you're in a role where you're rounding out your skills to position yourself for a move to another role. And for work like this, be clear and honest with yourself about your goal. Because I've seen more than once members of my team who've taken a role like this, but then forgotten what this was their goal. So they get frustrated when they're not seeing the success in the same way they always have. For example, I had a woman on my team who was a strong project manager and a real subject matter expert in her area. But she wanted to move to product, and she knew she would need to take a step back if she moved ladders, but she felt really strongly about it, and she decided to make the move. But it was really hard for her. She went from being a real expert in her field to learning mode in her new PM role. She was so frustrated that she ended up leaving. And I see that as a miss on my part and something I'm much more careful about today, exploring really thoroughly with people whether it's really the right fit for them to do something like this. And lastly, you can simply be in a role where you turn off your computer at 5 every night, pursue a passion or play with your kids, or look after a sick family member and not think about work again until 9 the next day. And I've seen many different people do this for many different reasons. And I'd say 2 things about this. One, I have not seen this be a career death sentence for anyone. And 2, I have not heard anyone regret that they did this. So something to think about if you're contemplating a role like this and not sure about whether it's for you or not. I'll wrap this up by saying that I and every woman I've worked with have wanted different types of roles at different points in my life, and that's okay. But my first recommendation to you today is to make sure that the work that you're doing is meaningful and important to you in some way, because it makes getting up in the morning a lot easier. My second recommendation is a way I found to keep teams strong and connected even when they're not in the same place. And it's actually pretty simple: recognition. And by recognition, I do not mean things like company awards. Those are great and they have their place, no question. But when I say recognition, I mean something really specific, taking the time to personally recognize someone for a specific contribution, whether that be through email, Slack, in a meeting, whatever. I also usually copy the person's manager too. Quick real world example here. In my current role, I worked with someone in recruiting when I first joined Upwork. He was friendly and professional, a really great introduction to the company. And since then, as I've hired members of my team, he's continued to be friendly and professional with me and with every candidate. He also has excellent judgment, which is key for a recruiter. And he keeps a million balls in the air at once, dealing with candidates we're just beginning to speak to, those we have in the midst of the interview process, and those we're extending offers to. There are so many people to speak to internally on all of these, and he makes it all look easy. So I sent a note to his manager and copied him, explaining how he'd been both a great welcome to the company for me, and also how he had helped me quickly build out my team and how helpful both of those were. His manager replied with, "That made my day," which was so great to hear, and he was thrilled too. And so a couple things about this. First, it feels so good sending these that it's almost cheating because it's such a mood boost for me. And second, more than one person has told me that they have filed these emails away to read again when they're down and they need a lift. And third, when you start doing this, you'll see that it really catches on. There's something about the specificity of it, calling out a specific contribution by a specific person that makes it so powerful. People realize that and realize that it's actually not that hard to do, and it can quickly become a very popular way to recognize people. My third recommendation on how to stay motivated is a little more complex. Join teams or hire people who aren't like you. Many of us are familiar with the facts about how diverse teams perform better, but as someone who is really interested in making data-driven decisions, for me, it was the reason behind why these teams perform better that was really interesting. It turns out that diverse teams are really good at what's called cognitive elaboration, the process of sharing, challenging, expanding a group's thinking. Diverse teams compel each other to think more deeply about their reasoning, and they interrogate the facts more objectively than teams who share a common background. They share counterfactuals as they go. They don't take things for granted. And there's minimal what's called social loafing of just accepting things at face value. Diverse teams tend to come to better conclusions because those conclusions have been road tested more thoroughly. And I see it today in my job, which is I have team members from Ecuador to San Francisco to Chicago to Paris to Singapore. And when we get on a Zoom, there is almost nothing we have in common across the group except that we all want to solve the same problem. So we start at the beginning every time with all the facts. And although it takes a little longer, even 6 months into the job, I can see that we're getting a better product. My last recommendation today is to focus on what work gets done, not how it gets done. And I think that this is one that as PMs leading teams, we have a lot of opportunity to influence. I think there's still a perception in a lot of circles that you have to be in an office to be connected with your team. And ironically, Upwork is 100% remote, but I've never felt more connected to my team. And this is partly because we all have to make a real effort to stay connected. Upwork has an office in San Francisco, and as a team, we're very intentional about the on-sites that we plan there together and about using the time together very wisely. When we're not together, we are completely committed to making sure that people who are remote have an equal experience to those who are in the room. The expectation is that when a group is in person, but someone else is remote, the team all joins Zoom from their computers so that everyone has an equal experience. A lot of us also take advantage of Loom, which is a video messaging platform. One leader on the team records a 10 to 15 minute Loom session every Friday where he shares what's on his mind from the previous week and what he's thinking about for the week ahead. the type of things that he might have shared previously just in a staff meeting in the past. And it's great because he actually distributes the loom to a pretty wide distribution list. And a lot of us really look forward to getting them and understanding what's on his mind and what's ahead for his team. Slack channels are used really well for async updates. Most large meetings are recorded, and you can submit questions in advance. So if you're in a time zone that would make it difficult for you to join, you could still get the benefit of our weekly company-wide meetings. And for people who aren't remote first, I'd encourage you to think about a couple of things. What really needs to be done in person? Sometimes there's no replacement for being in person for things like brainstorming. Second, what needs to be done synchronously? How many hours a day do people really need to work together? In a past role, I looked at the meetings that I typically had with my team, and I realized that we probably needed 4 hours together a day. So I was thoughtful about where I hired from. For example, hiring in places like India, where there was almost no overlap, was a non-starter for me. On the other hand, many places in Europe did work. And third, what's work that can be done anytime? And I challenge you to be really flexible about your thinking here. Would you rather take higher quality work that someone does before or after traditional working hours, or something they're trying to quickly fit in the last 30 minutes of their day before they have to run out and pick up their kids or meet an obligation to a partner or a parent? And I'll finish up today by saying these are the things that have worked for me, and I hope that they work for you too. But research shows that we are all best motivated by our own values. So as the world changes around us, I'd encourage you to take a few minutes to reflect on what really motivates you, and then to work to make that a priority in your career.